The early morning stillness of Ouagadougou was broken by the rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors cutting through the dusty harmattan wind. In the presidential palace, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood by the window of his Spartan office, his lean frame silhouetted against the rising sun that painted the Burkinabe capital in shades of amber and gold. At 37, he was the second youngest head of state in the world, a military man thrust into leadership during his country's darkest hour. His expression remained impassive as he listened to the latest security briefing, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his deep concern. The weight of an entire nation's survival rested on the decisions he would make in the coming hours, decisions that would either secure Burkina Faso's future or see it consumed by the jihadist insurgency that had already claimed thousands of lives. The jihadists have overrun another village near the northern border, reported General Moussa Diallo, his weathered face grave with the burden of delivering yet another report of catastrophe. 43 civilians killed, including 12 children and 3 teachers. They burned the school, destroyed the clinic, and executed the village chief in front of his family. They're moving south with increasing confidence, Mr. President. Each victory emboldens them further. Traoré nodded slowly, processing the information with the calculated composure that had become his trademark since seizing power in September 2022. His rise had been meteoric and controversial, from artillery captain to president in a matter of days after leading a coup against the previous military government of Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, which it had itself seized power only 8 months earlier in a previous coup. The international community had watched these rapid changes with growing alarm, seeing yet another example of West African instability. But those who dismissed Traoré as merely another military opportunist failed to understand the depth of his strategic vision and his unwavering commitment to Burkina Faso's sovereignty. "What about our conventional aerial reconnaissance?" Traoré asked, his voice quiet but commanding, carrying the authority that had persuaded seasoned military officers to follow him against a sitting government. "Limited effectiveness, Mr. President," General Diallo replied, with frustration evident in his tone. "They're adapting to our patterns, hiding during our surveillance flights. They've learned to scatter when they hear our helicopters approaching, and they communicate using methods that avoid our standard intercepts. We're always one step behind." Traoré turned from the window, his penetrating gaze settling on the large map of Burkina Faso that dominated the wall of his office. Red pins marked territories controlled or contested by various jihadist groups: Jamaat Nasr al-Islam wal Muslim, Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, and several smaller but equally deadly factions. The pins had multiplied alarmingly over the past year, spreading like a crimson infection across the northern and eastern regions of the country. Each pin represented not just tactical setbacks, but human suffering on an unimaginable scale. Villages emptied of their populations, schools closed permanently, healthcare clinics destroyed, and entire communities living in terror. The conventional military response had proven inadequate against an enemy that moved like smoke through the vast, ungoverned spaces of the Sahel. "And the Turkish equipment?" he inquired quietly, referring to a recent acquisition that had been kept largely secret from both the public and most government officials. General Diallo straightened, a subtle change in his posture suggesting this topic carried special significance. "The final shipment arrived last night under cover of darkness. The training program is complete. Dr. Konate and her team have finished the integration protocols." A subtle change came over Traoré's face, not quite a smile, but a hardening of resolve that suggested months of careful planning were about to culminate in action. "Then it's time," he said with quiet finality. "Convene the Security Council in 1 hour. Alert all department heads that we're moving to elevated operational status." As General Diallo departed to carry out these instructions, Traoré remained alone with his thoughts and the crushing weight of leadership. The path that had brought him to this moment had been unlikely and marked by profound personal transformation. Born in 1988 in the small town of Bondakui in western Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré had grown up in modest circumstances that were typical of rural Burkina Faso. His father was a subsistence farmer who also worked as a local administrator, instilling in his son both respect for education and understanding of governance challenges. His mother, a teacher, had encouraged his intellectual curiosity and academic excellence. Young Ibrahim had initially pursued geology at the University of Ouagadougou, drawn by the prospect of contributing to his country's mineral development. But the deteriorating security situation and his deep sense of patriotic duty led him to join the military in 2009, beginning as a second lieutenant in the artillery corps. His experiences fighting jihadists in northern Burkina Faso and later serving in the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali had profoundly shaped his worldview. He witnessed firsthand both the devastating human cost of extremism and the limitations of conventional military responses. More importantly, he observed the inadequacy of foreign intervention that relied on external logistics, intelligence, and decision-making processes that often failed to account for local realities. During his UN deployment, Traoré had also gained exposure to advanced military technologies employed by various contingents, sparking his interest in how technological superiority could be leveraged by smaller, resource-constrained forces. He began to envision a different approach to counterterrorism, one that combined technological innovation with deep understanding of local conditions. When he seized power, many international observers had dismissed him as just another military strongman in a region plagued by coups and instability. Western media portrayed him as inexperienced and possibly a puppet of Russian interests, particularly after his subsequent pivot away from traditional French military cooperation. The characterization stung because it fundamentally misunderstood his motivations and capabilities. But those who underestimated Ibrahim Traoré failed to recognize the depth of his strategic vision and his unwavering commitment to Burkina Faso's sovereignty. He had spent the months following his rise to power, quietly implementing a comprehensive strategy that few fully understood. While critics focused on his youth and military background, he had been building relationships with technologically advanced partners willing to transfer not just equipment, but knowledge. Most importantly, he had identified and recruited brilliant Burkinabe minds who had been overlooked or underutilized by previous governments. The Security Council meeting that morning was brief, decisive, and would later be remembered as the moment Burkina Faso stepped onto the global stage as a technological power. Around a polished mahogany table sat the highest military and intelligence officials in the country, men and women who had weathered years of escalating violence as terrorist groups exploited the vast, ungovernable spaces of the Sahel. The room itself reflected Traoré's leadership style, functional rather than ostentatious, with advanced communication equipment alongside traditional African art that reminded everyone present of their cultural identity and historical resilience. Operation Golden Eagle will commence at 0400 hours tomorrow, Traoré announced, his voice steady and authoritative. This will not be a conventional counterterrorism operation. We are fundamentally changing the paradigm of how Burkina Faso defends itself. Colonel Fatouma Sow, head of military intelligence, and one of the few people who knew the full scope of Traoré's strategic vision, distributed sealed folders to each attendee. At 45, she was a veteran intelligence officer with 2 decades of experience fighting terrorism across the Sahel. Her analytical mind and uncompromising dedication to national security had made her one of Traoré's most trusted advisors. "These contain your specific directives," she explained. "Operational security is paramount. No communications about this operation outside this room, no exceptions, regardless of clearance level or personal relationships." As the officials reviewed the documents, murmurs of surprise rippled through the chamber. What Traoré was proposing was unprecedented for Burkina Faso. A coordinated drone strike campaign utilizing technology that few knew the country possessed, enhanced by locally developed systems that would give them capabilities rivaling those of major powers. Major Emmanuel Ouedraogo, head of the newly established Drone Command Unit, rose to provide technical details. At 34, he was among the youngest members of the Security Council, but his expertise in unmanned aerial systems had made him indispensable to Traoré's vision. "The Bayraktar TB2 drones have been extensively modified according to our specifications," he explained, activating a wall display that showed technical schematics. "We've integrated locally developed targeting systems that operate independent of external satellite networks, making us immune to foreign interference or signal jamming." Dr. Aminata Konate, who had been quietly observing from a corner of the room, stepped forward. At 32, she was a computer scientist who had returned to Burkina Faso after studying in Spain and working briefly in Silicon Valley. Her decision to abandon a lucrative career in American tech to serve her homeland had initially puzzled friends and family, but Traoré had recognized her exceptional talents and patriotic commitment. "The artificial intelligence system we've developed specifically for Sahelian conditions," she explained with quiet confidence, "can distinguish between combatants and civilians with 98.7% accuracy in our terrain. More importantly, it has been trained to recognize cultural and behavioral patterns specific to our region, making it far more effective than generic systems designed elsewhere." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Burkina Faso had not simply purchased military equipment from Turkey. They had transformed it into something uniquely adapted to their specific challenges, creating capabilities that existed nowhere else in the world. The integration process took 18 months of intensive work, conducted away from international observers and intelligence services. We deliberately allowed the impression that we were simply acquiring standard Turkish hardware while our best minds were creating something unprecedented. He stood, placing both hands on the table and leaning forward, his intense gaze meeting each council member's eyes. "For too long, our people have lived in fear. Children cannot attend school because teachers are being beheaded. Farmers cannot tend their fields because jihadists control rural areas. Our sovereignty has been compromised by dependence on foreign military support that consistently fails to deliver meaningful security." His voice remained calm but carried unmistakable conviction. "Tomorrow, we demonstrate that Burkina Faso can defend itself with capabilities that exceed those of our enemies and rival those of major powers." The meeting concluded with solemn nods from all participants. Each person in the room understood that they were about to participate in something historically significant. If successful, Operation Golden Eagle would not only advance national security objectives, but would fundamentally alter perceptions of African technological capability. As council members filed out to prepare for the operation, Traoré asked Colonel Sao to remain behind. Once they were alone, his formal demeanor softened slightly, revealing the personal concern underneath his presidential composure. "Fatuma, I need your honest assessment," he said, using the familiar form of her name that indicated their long professional relationship. "Are we truly ready for what comes next?" Sao, who had known Traoré since his early military career, considered the question carefully. She had witnessed his evolution from promising young officer to visionary leader, and she understood both his capabilities and the enormous risks they were about to undertake. "The technology is sound," she replied thoughtfully. "The pilots are exceptionally well trained. The intelligence on terrorist positions is as accurate as we can make it. From a purely operational standpoint, we're as prepared as possible." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "But Ibrahim, this will change everything. Once we demonstrate these capabilities, we become players in a much larger game. Powers that have ignored us will suddenly pay very close attention. Some will want to partner with us, others will see us as a threat to be neutralized." "That's precisely the point," Traoré replied with determination. "Change is long overdue. Burkina Faso will no longer be dismissed as merely a victim of circumstances beyond our control. We will be recognized as a nation capable of shaping our own destiny." That night, as darkness enveloped Ouagadougou and the city settled into an uneasy quiet, final preparations for Operation Golden Eagle accelerated across multiple secure facilities. The scope and sophistication of what Burkina Faso was about to unleash would later be studied in military academies worldwide, but at this moment it remained known only to a small circle of trusted officials and technicians. In a heavily guarded facility on the outskirts of the capital, drone pilots conducted final system checks under the supervision of Turkish military advisors who had been contracted to provide training but remained unaware of the full scope of Burkina Faso's modifications to their equipment. The pilots, all selected for exceptional skill and absolute loyalty, moved through pre-flight protocols with the precision of elite military units. Captain Salif Ouedraogo, the lead pilot for the operation, reviewed targeting data on multiple screens, displaying real-time intelligence gathered over weeks of surveillance. At 29, he was among Burkina Faso's most experienced drone operators, having trained extensively in Turkey before returning to help establish the domestic program. "All systems showing green," he reported to Major Emmanuel Ouedraogo, who was coordinating the technical aspects of the operation. "The modified targeting system is responding perfectly. Dr. Konaté's algorithms are integrating seamlessly with the Turkish hardware." In an adjacent building, teams of engineers made final adjustments to the Bayraktar TB2 and Akinji drones that Turkey had supplied as part of a defense agreement personally negotiated by Traoré. The aircraft themselves were impressive, sleek, modern unmanned aerial vehicles with proven combat effectiveness in conflicts from Syria to Libya. But what made Operation Golden Eagle truly revolutionary was not the Turkish hardware itself, but what Burkina Faso had done with it. Under Traoré's directive, a secret team of local engineers and computer scientists had completely redesigned the drone's operating systems, integrating domestically developed artificial intelligence that could identify targets with unprecedented precision in the challenging Sahelian environment. Dr. Aminata Konaté moved between workstations where her team of 28 engineers and programmers made final calibrations to the AI targeting system. Many of them were young graduates whom Traoré had personally recruited from universities across West Africa, offering them the opportunity to contribute to a project that would demonstrate African technological capability on a global stage. "The machine learning algorithms have been trained on over 100,000 hours of Sahelian imagery," she explained to a visiting Turkish advisor who had been permitted limited access to their work. "We've incorporated everything from seasonal vegetation changes to traditional architectural patterns to livestock movement behaviors. This allows the system to distinguish between legitimate civilian activities and potential terrorist operations with remarkable accuracy." What she didn't mention was the system's most revolutionary capability: full autonomous operation in communications-denied environments. While most drone systems required constant communication with ground control stations, Burkina Faso's modified aircraft could make independent tactical decisions within carefully programmed parameters, maintaining effectiveness even when enemies attempted to jam or intercept their control signals. The technological leap had required 18 months of intensive work conducted in absolute secrecy. Traoré had established the development program using funding originally allocated for conventional military equipment, redirecting resources toward what he believed would be more effective asymmetric capabilities. The team had worked in isolated facilities, with cover stories suggesting they were developing agricultural applications for drone technology. International intelligence services, focused on conventional military threats, had largely overlooked what appeared to be civilian technology development in one of Africa's poorest countries. As midnight approached, Ibrahim Traoré made a final tour of the operations facilities, accompanied only by his closest security detail. He moved through each area methodically, speaking briefly with pilots, engineers, and intelligence analysts, ensuring that everyone understood both their specific roles and the historical significance of what they were attempting. Tomorrow will mark a turning point not just for our country, but potentially for the entire continent, he told a group of young technicians. You are proving that African minds can create technological solutions equal to any in the world. At 0330 hours, dressed in simple military fatigues, without insignia or decorations, Ibrahim Traoré arrived at the newly constructed Strategic Operations Center, a facility that rivaled intelligence centers in major capitals, but had been built entirely with domestic resources and expertise. The atmosphere was tense but controlled as he took his position in the command center, surrounded by screens displaying real-time data from surveillance assets positioned across northern Burkina Faso. The main display showed a comprehensive picture of terrorist activities gathered through weeks of patient intelligence work. All units report ready, Mr. President, announced General Diallo, who had coordinated the military aspects of the operation while Dr. Konate had overseen the technological components. Traoré nodded, his expression resolute but calm. This was the moment toward which months of planning, technological development, and strategic patience had been directed. The success or failure of Operation Golden Eagle would determine not only Burkina Faso's immediate security situation, but its long-term position in an increasingly complex global order.
Then let us begin, he said quietly. As the digital clock displayed 0400 hours exactly, he gave the command that would transform both his country's security situation and its international standing. Launch Operation Golden Eagle. 400 kilometers north of Ouagadougou, in a remote compound nestled among scrubland and ancient baobab trees near the Mali border, Ousmane Dicko held court as the regional commander of JNIM's Burkina Faso operations. At 34, he had risen through the jihadist ranks through a combination of tactical skill, religious fervor, and ruthless elimination of rivals within the organization. The compound served multiple functions: command center, training facility, and logistics hub for terrorist operations across the tri-border region. It housed approximately 150 fighters, including both local recruits drawn from impoverished rural communities and foreign jihadists who had traveled to the Sahel to join what they saw as a divinely sanctioned war against secular governments and Western influence. Allah has blessed our campaign beyond our greatest expectations, Dicko told assembled fighters in the pre-dawn darkness, his voice carrying across the compound with the confidence of someone who believed divine providence guaranteed ultimate victory. Government forces retreat wherever we advance. Their foreign supporters grow weary of a conflict they cannot win. Soon we will control not just the northern regions, but the entire country. What Dicko did not know was that his location, long elusive to Burkina Faso intelligence services, had been pinpointed 3 days earlier through a combination of signal intercepts, human intelligence, and the sophisticated analysis capabilities that Dr. Konaté's team had developed. The compound had been under surveillance ever since, with every movement, every communication, and every tactical pattern carefully monitored and recorded. The intelligence breakthrough had come from an unexpected source: social media analysis. Despite their operational security, several younger fighters had been posting images and videos that, when analyzed by AI systems trained to recognize Sahelian geographic features, had allowed Dr. Konaté's team to narrow potential locations to a handful of compounds. Cross-referencing this with communications intelligence and human sources had provided definitive identification. At the Strategic Operations Center in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré and his commanders watched high-resolution drone footage of the compound transmitted in real time from a Bayraktar TB2, circling at high altitude, well beyond detection range of any ground-based systems the terrorists might possess. The imagery was remarkably clear, showing individual figures moving between buildings, vehicles parked in defensive positions, and weapons caches that had been carefully mapped over days of surveillance. The AI targeting system continuously updated threat assessments, distinguishing between combatants and the small number of civilians who might be present. "Confirmation on primary target?" asked Traoré, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what was about to occur. "Positive identification of Ousmane Diko and at least 4 other high-value targets," Colonel Sow responded, her voice reflecting the confidence that came from meticulous intelligence preparation. "Minimal civilian presence detected. The AI system indicates 97.3% confidence that all individuals in the target buildings are combatants." Traoré studied the imagery intently, understanding that the decisions made in the next few minutes would reverberate far beyond this single operation. This was not merely a tactical strike against terrorist leaders, but a demonstration of Burkina Faso's technological capabilities that would be observed and analyzed by intelligence services worldwide. Ordered. Proceed with Phase 1. Major Emmanuel Ouedraogo, seated at the centralized drone control station, issued commands to his team of pilots. The interface they were using was unlike anything employed by other military forces, a seamless integration of Turkish hardware with Burkinabe software that provided unprecedented situational awareness and targeting precision. "Engage primary target with precision munitions," he announced. "All pilots confirm ready status." What happened next occurred with such speed, precision, and devastating effectiveness that it would later be studied as a paradigm shift in asymmetric warfare. 4 Bayraktar TB2 drones, operating in perfect coordination despite being separated by several kilometers, launched MAML smart micro-munitions simultaneously from different vectors. The compound's rudimentary air defenses, consisting mainly of heavy machine guns and man-portable surface-to-air missiles designed to target conventional aircraft, detected nothing until explosive impacts were already occurring. The defensive systems, effective against helicopters and low-flying planes, were completely inadequate against small, high-altitude drones using precision-guided munitions. The explosions were precisely targeted, striking the main command building where leadership was gathered, the communications center that coordinated operations across the region, the weapons depot containing explosives and ammunition, and the vehicle park housing technicals and supply trucks. Secondary explosions rippled through the compound as stored ammunition and fuel reserves ignited in a cascade of destruction. In the operations center, the footage displayed devastation in stark infrared clarity that revealed the effectiveness of every strike. There was no cheering, no celebration among the personnel, just the quiet professionalism of military staff executing a carefully planned operation with clinical precision. "Phase 1 complete," Major Ouedraogo reported. "All primary targets destroyed. Moving to Phase 2. Phase 2 demonstrated the truly revolutionary aspects of Burkina Faso's drone capabilities. As surviving fighters fled the compound in panic, they were tracked by Akinci drones, larger, more advanced unmanned aerial vehicles with greater range, payload capacity, and endurance than the TB2s that had conducted the initial strikes. Using Dr. Kanate's locally developed targeting AI, the drones identified and pursued high-value targets even as they attempted to disperse and hide in terrain that previously had provided sanctuary from conventional military forces. The system's ability to distinguish between fleeing combatants and civilian populations, even in low-light conditions and challenging terrain, represented a quantum leap in precision warfare. What made this pursuit extraordinary was the drone's ability to operate without continuous communication with ground control stations. The modified AI systems allowed them to make autonomous targeting decisions within carefully prescribed parameters, maintaining effectiveness even in areas where communication signals were jammed or degraded, a common tactic employed by terrorist groups who had learned to exploit the technological dependencies of conventional forces.
"The AI is functioning as designed," reported one of Dr. Kanate's engineers, monitoring system performance from a workstation covered with displays showing algorithmic decision-making processes in real time. Target discrimination accuracy maintaining 98.7% despite challenging conditions. Traoré watched the pursuit intently, his expression unchanging even as reports of successful strikes continued to arrive. This was not merely a military operation, it was a demonstration of capabilities that would send messages far beyond Burkina Faso's borders to allies, enemies, and global powers who had consistently underestimated African technological potential. By sunrise, Operation Golden Eagle had expanded to include 3 additional terrorist camps that had been identified through intelligence gathered during the initial strikes. Communications intercepts, document recovery, and prisoner interrogations had revealed the locations of supporting facilities that could now be targeted while their occupants remained unaware of the primary compound's destruction. The precision and coordination of the attacks were unprecedented in regional counterterrorism efforts, achieving maximum impact on terrorist infrastructure and leadership while minimizing collateral damage that had plagued previous operations. International news agencies began reporting unusual aerial activity in northern Burkina Faso, but details remained scarce due to the communications blackout that Traoré had imposed around the operation. All official channels maintained strict silence, preventing premature disclosures that might compromise ongoing operations or provide intelligence to surviving terrorist elements. As morning progressed into afternoon, the true scope and effectiveness of Operation Golden Eagle began to emerge through careful intelligence analysis and post-strike reconnaissance. In the Operations Center, Colonel Sao compiled preliminary assessments that exceeded even the most optimistic projections from the planning phase. "Mr. President," she announced, her professional composure unable to entirely conceal her satisfaction with the results, "we have confirmed the elimination of 17 high-value targets, including Ousmane Diko and 3 other regional commanders who have been responsible for some of the worst atrocities against our civilian population." She activated a wall display showing detailed battle damage assessment imagery. 4 major training facilities have been completely destroyed, along with substantial weapons caches, vehicle pools, and communications equipment. We estimate total enemy casualties exceed 200 combatants, with confirmed destruction of approximately 30 technical vehicles and significant disruption of their logistical networks. For the first time since Operation Golden Eagle began, a hint of satisfaction crossed Traoré's face. The results validated months of careful planning, technological development, and strategic patience. More importantly,
They demonstrated that his vision of technological self-determination could produce tangible security benefits for the Burkinabe people. "And our losses?" he inquired, though he already knew the answer would underscore the revolutionary nature of what they had accomplished. "None, Mr. President," Colonel Sal replied. "All drones return safely to base or remain in operational status. We achieved complete tactical surprise and maintained it throughout the entire operation." The room fell silent as the full implications became clear. Burkina Faso had just executed the most sophisticated drone campaign ever conducted by an African military, achieving results that would have been impossible with conventional forces, and doing so without suffering a single casualty. The contrast with previous counterterrorism operations was stark. Traditional approaches had required large ground forces, helicopter support, and extensive logistics that made operations predictable and vulnerable to terrorist countermeasures. Even when successful, conventional operations typically resulted in significant military casualties and often caused civilian casualties that undermined public support. "We have demonstrated what Africans can achieve when we develop our own technological solutions," Traoré said, addressing the room with quiet pride. "This operation proves that innovation, properly applied, can overcome resource constraints and achieve strategic effects that surpass those of much larger, more expensive military forces." But even as he spoke, Traoré understood that Operation Golden Eagle was only the beginning of a much larger transformation. The technological capabilities they had demonstrated would inevitably attract international attention, creating both opportunities and challenges that would test Burkina Faso's strategic patience and diplomatic skill. Dr. Konate, who had been monitoring international communications and media coverage, approached with a tablet displaying early reactions from around the world. "The intelligence we're intercepting suggests considerable confusion in foreign capitals. Most international observers are struggling to understand how we achieved these results." Satellite imagery of the strikes was already circulating in international intelligence communities, causing analysts from Washington to Moscow to scramble to understand how Burkina Faso, a country with limited resources and no prior history of advanced drone warfare, had managed to execute such a complex and effective operation. The answer lay in Ibrahim Traoré's strategic vision, which had fundamentally reimagined how a smaller nation could achieve technological superiority through focused innovation rather than massive resource expenditure. Since taking power, he had redirected military spending away from conventional force structures toward asymmetric capabilities, investing heavily in technology development and specialized training. Crucially, he had sought partnerships with nations like Turkey that were willing to transfer technology without the political constraints and dependency relationships typically imposed by Western allies. Most importantly, he had recognized and invested in the exceptional talents of his own people, establishing secretive development programs that brought together the country's best engineers, programmers, and military strategists. The results spoke for themselves. Locally developed artificial intelligence systems that outperformed generic alternatives in Sahelian conditions. Modified drone platforms that exceeded the capabilities of their original designs, and operational concepts that maximized technological advantages while minimizing resource requirements. By evening, as drone patrols continued their precision campaign against remaining terrorist targets across the northern regions, Ibrahim Traoré prepared to address the nation. He chose to speak from his office rather than a formal setting, wearing a simple military uniform without medals or decorations that might suggest personal aggrandizement rather than national service. "People of Burkina Faso,"
he began, his expression solemn but confident. Today marks a decisive turning point in our struggle against terrorism. Our armed forces have struck devastating blows against those who have brought death and suffering to our communities for too many years. He described Operation Golden Eagle in measured terms, emphasizing technological achievement while avoiding specific details that might compromise ongoing operations or provide intelligence to remaining terrorist elements. For too long, we have been told that African nations cannot solve African problems without external guidance and control. He continued, his voice carrying conviction that resonated far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Today, we have proven otherwise. The technology used in these operations was not simply purchased from abroad, it was enhanced and adapted by Burkinabe minds, operated by Burkinabe hands, in service of Burkinabe security and African dignity. As his speech continued, Traoré articulated a vision that would influence technological development policies across the global South. He argued that true security required not just effective weapon systems, but technological sovereignty, the ability to develop, maintain, and advance capabilities independently of foreign control or dependency. Let this serve as both a warning to our enemies and a message to the world. He concluded with words that would be remembered as a defining moment in post-colonial African history. Burkina Faso will defend its sovereignty with all means at our disposal. We seek friendship and cooperation with all nations, but we will never again outsource our security or compromise our independence. The destiny of Africa will be written by Africans. Across Burkina Faso, citizens gathered around televisions and radios to absorb Traoré's words, many hearing for the first time about the technological capabilities their nation had secretly developed. In northern villages that had lived under the constant threat of terrorist attack, there was cautious hope tempered by years of disappointment with previous security promises. In the town of Djibo, which had been attacked 3 times by jihadist forces, elderly resident Amadou Sawadogo listened to the president's address with his extended family gathered around a solar-powered radio. "Can it be true?" asked his daughter Fatima, a schoolteacher who had been forced to flee to the capital when terrorists threatened educators. "Do we really have weapons that can defeat the jihadists without putting our soldiers at risk?" "If President Traoré says it, I believe it. But more important than the weapons is what he said about Africans solving African problems. That is something I thought I would never live to hear from our leaders." In Ouagadougou's Revolution Square, crowds spontaneously gathered throughout the evening, waving Burkinabe flags and chanting Traoré's name. Young people in particular seemed energized by his message of technological sovereignty and African capability, seeing in his words a rejection of the dependency relationships that had defined their country's international relations since independence. But the reaction in foreign capitals was more complex and, in some cases, deeply concerned. Intelligence agencies scrambled to assess the full capabilities of what analysts were already calling the Ouagadougou Doctrine, the use of adapted drone technology with indigenous AI systems to achieve strategic military objectives with minimal resources and maximum precision. At the Pentagon, senior military officials convened an emergency assessment meeting to analyze footage and intelligence from Operation Golden Eagle.
The precision and effectiveness of the strikes had impressed even experienced military professionals, while raising questions about how such capabilities had been developed without detection by American intelligence services. This changes the strategic calculation across the entire Sahel region, observed a senior Defense Intelligence Agency analyst. If Burkina Faso can achieve these results with modified Turkish hardware and locally developed software, what does that mean for our assumptions about technological proliferation and regional power balances? Similar conversations were occurring in European capitals, where officials who had long viewed Burkina Faso as a peripheral concern suddenly found themselves needing to reassess their strategies for the entire West African region. The French Foreign Ministry, in particular, struggled to respond to a development that challenged fundamental assumptions about African technological dependency. In Moscow and Beijing, the reaction was more calculating. Both Russian and Chinese officials saw in Traoré's success a validation of their own approaches to technology transfer and South-South cooperation, contrasting favorably with Western policies that typically sought to maintain technological advantages rather than genuinely sharing capabilities. What no international observer yet fully realized was that Operation Golden Eagle represented not merely a tactical success against regional terrorist groups, but the first demonstration of a technological revolution that would reshape power dynamics across the global South. The implications extended far beyond military applications to encompass everything from economic development to diplomatic relationships. Dr. Konate, monitoring international responses from her secure facility, compiled intelligence on foreign responses for Traoré's morning briefing. The global attention was both gratifying and concerning. Validation of their technological achievement, but also indication that Burkina Faso would face increasing scrutiny and potential pressure from powers accustomed to controlling advanced military technologies. "We're receiving informal inquiries from dozens of countries," she reported to Traoré. "Some want to purchase our technology, others want to understand how we developed it, and a few seem to be assessing whether we represent a threat to their interests." Traoré nodded thoughtfully. He had anticipated this reaction and had been preparing for the diplomatic and strategic challenges that would inevitably follow their technological demonstration. The next phase of his vision required careful navigation of international pressures while maintaining the momentum toward greater technological independence.
"Tomorrow we begin Phase 2, he announced to his core team. The military operation was necessary to establish security and demonstrate capability. Now we must transform that capability into comprehensive national development while defending our technological sovereignty against those who will seek to control or neutralize what we have achieved." The morning after Operation Golden Eagle's stunning success, Ibrahim Traoré convened an expanded meeting that included not only his Security Council, but also economists, educators, agricultural specialists, and healthcare administrators. The transition from military application to comprehensive development represented the true test of his strategic vision. "The security we have established is meaningless unless it creates opportunities for our people to build better lives," he told the assembled officials in the presidential conference room. "Our drone technology must serve human development as effectively as it served national defense." Dr. Konate presented detailed plans for adapting their military drone systems to civilian applications. The same AI algorithms that could distinguish combatants from civilians could identify crop diseases, monitor livestock health, and optimize irrigation patterns.
The precision targeting systems could deliver medical supplies to remote villages or emergency aid to disaster areas. "We have already begun field testing agricultural applications," she explained, displaying drone footage of experimental farms where the technology was being used to monitor crop health and optimize resource allocation. Initial results show productivity increases of 35 to 40% in pilot programs, with significant reductions in water usage and pesticide application. The economic implications were profound. Burkina Faso's agricultural sector employed over 80% of the population, but had been constrained by inefficient resource use, unpredictable weather patterns, and limited access to modern farming techniques. Drone technology could address all of these challenges while creating new employment opportunities in technology maintenance and data analysis. Minister of Agriculture Abdoulaye Soro presented projections showing how scaled implementation of agricultural drones could increase food security, reduce rural poverty, and potentially transform Burkina Faso from a food importing to food exporting nation within 5 years. But we must ensure that this technology remains under our control, warned Foreign Minister Abdoul Diallo. Already we're receiving pressure from various international organizations to share our innovations through existing frameworks that would compromise our sovereignty. This concern reflected a deeper challenge that Traoré had anticipated. The same international system that had consistently failed to provide effective security assistance now demanded access to the technological solutions that Burkina Faso had developed independently. The requests were couched in language of multilateral cooperation and global security, but the underlying message was clear. Technological capabilities of this sophistication were not supposed to be controlled by small African nations. "We will engage with international partners, but only on terms that respect our sovereignty and serve our development priorities. The days when Africa provided raw materials and received finished products in return are ending. We will be technology exporters, not just consumers." This statement articulated a vision that extended far beyond military applications to encompass comprehensive technological independence. Traoré envisioned Burkina Faso as a hub for African technological innovation, developing solutions specifically designed for African conditions and controlled by African institutions. The meeting concluded with the establishment of the National Technology Development Council, a civilian organization that would oversee the expansion of drone technology into healthcare, agriculture, education, and infrastructure development. Unlike many government initiatives that existed primarily on paper, this council had immediate access to proven technology and substantial funding redirected from conventional military expenditures. Later that day, Traoré traveled to the village of Kongoussi, about 100 kilometers north of Ouagadougou, to personally observe the first deployment of agricultural drones in a rural community that had been repeatedly attacked by terrorists over the past 3 years. The village chief, Umaru Sawadogo, greeted the president with a mixture of respect and cautious hope. At 68, he had witnessed decades of promises from politicians that rarely translated into meaningful improvements in rural life. "Mr. President," he said, "we have heard about your success against the terrorists, and we are grateful. But we have also heard about new technology for farming. Can these machines really help us grow more food?" Traoré's response demonstrated his understanding that technological sovereignty meant nothing if it didn't improve ordinary people's lives. "Chief Sawadogo, let me show you what your country's engineers have created." Dr. Konate and her team had prepared a comprehensive demonstration. They launched an agricultural drone that systematically surveyed the village's farming areas, using multispectral sensors to identify crop health issues invisible to the naked eye. The data was processed in real time by AI systems specifically trained on Sahelian agricultural conditions. Within minutes, the system had identified areas of water stress, nutrient deficiency, and early-stage pest infestation across hundreds of hectares. More importantly, it provided specific recommendations for addressing each problem, optimizing resource allocation to maximize crop yields while minimizing costs. The same technology that protects our security can improve our prosperity, Traoré explained to the assembled villagers. These drones will monitor your crops, help you use water more efficiently, and alert you to problems before they become disasters. But the demonstration went beyond agricultural applications. Medical supply drones conducted practice runs, showing how emergency medications could be delivered to remote areas faster than any ground transportation. Education drones equipped with satellite communication systems connected the village school to universities in Ouagadougou, enabling remote learning opportunities previously impossible.
The villagers' reaction was a mixture of amazement and pride. They were witnessing technology more advanced than what was available in many developed countries, but it was being operated by young Burkinabe technicians and designed specifically for their needs and conditions. "This is what independence looks like," observed Fatima Sawadogo, a young teacher who had returned to the village after the security situation improved. Not just freedom from colonial powers, but the ability to create our own solutions to our own problems. As evening approached and the demonstration concluded, Traoré addressed the gathered villagers in Moor, the local language, rather than French. His message was simple but profound. The technology that had defeated terrorism would now be used to defeat poverty, disease, and educational inequality. "Our enemies sought to keep us divided and dependent," he said. "Instead, we have become united and self-reliant. This is only the beginning of what we can achieve together." The global response to Burkina Faso's technological emergence intensified as foreign governments moved beyond initial surprise to active policy formulation. 3 weeks after Operation Golden Eagle, Traoré found himself navigating a complex web of diplomatic pressures, partnership offers, and thinly veiled threats. The French ambassador requested an urgent meeting, arriving at the presidential palace with a delegation that included military attachés and representatives from major defense contractors. Ambassador Philippe Leclerc had served in multiple African postings and considered himself an expert on Franco-African relations, but he was clearly unprepared for the new reality that Traoré represented. "President Traoré," he began, employing the formal diplomatic language that often masked condescending attitudes, "France has been Burkina Faso's security partner for decades. We are concerned that recent military developments may have implications for regional stability and existing cooperation agreements." Traoré's response was polite but firm, reflecting his determination to engage with international partners from a position of strength rather than dependency. "Ambassador Leclerc, France's friendship has been valuable to our country. However, our recent operations demonstrate that Burkina Faso is capable of addressing its security challenges with greater effectiveness than has been achieved through traditional partnerships." The implicit criticism was unmistakable. Despite years of French military presence and billions of euros in security assistance, terrorist attacks had increased rather than decreased under previous cooperation arrangements. Operation Golden Eagle had accomplished more in 48 hours than years of conventional counterterrorism operations. "We would be interested in understanding the technical specifications of your drone systems. Perhaps there are opportunities for joint development or technology sharing that could benefit both our nations," pressed Colonel Jean-Marc Dubois, the French military attaché.
Dr. Konate, who was present as a technical advisor, responded with carefully chosen words. Our systems were developed specifically for Sahelian conditions using indigenous expertise and locally adapted algorithms. While we remain open to mutually beneficial cooperation, any technology sharing would need to respect Burkina Faso's intellectual property rights and strategic autonomy. The French delegation exchanged glances that suggested this was not the response they had anticipated. The implication that Burkina Faso possessed intellectual property worth protecting and the confidence to assert ownership of advanced military technology challenged fundamental assumptions about African technological capacity. Similar meetings occurred with American, British, and German representatives, each seeking to understand and potentially gain access to capabilities they had not expected from a small West African nation. The consistent theme was surprise at Burkina Faso's technological sophistication, combined with discomfort at the independence it represented. But not all international reactions were negative. Turkey's President Erdogan personally called Traoré to congratulate him on the successful deployment of modified Turkish hardware and to discuss expanded defense cooperation. Unlike Western powers, Turkey seemed genuinely pleased that their technology had been enhanced rather than simply used as originally designed. You have shown what is possible when nations share technology as equals rather than in patron-client relationships, Erdogan told Traoré during a secure video conference. Turkey is prepared to expand our cooperation in ways that respect your sovereignty and support your development objectives. Chinese and Russian representatives also expressed interest in partnership arrangements, seeing in Burkina Faso's success validation of alternative approaches to international technology transfer. Both nations had experience with developing indigenous capabilities based on imported technologies, and they understood the strategic value of technological independence. However, the most significant international reaction came from other African nations, particularly those facing similar security challenges. Within days of Operation Golden Eagle, Traoré received calls from the leaders of Mali, Niger, Chad, and Nigeria, all seeking information about potential cooperation or technology transfer. The call from Colonel Assimi Goïta, Mali's military leader, was particularly important given the shared border and common security challenges. Ibrahim, he said, using the informal address that reflected their similar backgrounds as military officers who had assumed leadership during national crises. What you have achieved changes everything for the entire region. It demonstrates what is possible when we prioritize our own solutions over external dependency, Traoré replied. But success requires sustained commitment to technological development and strategic patience in the face of international pressure. These conversations led to the formation of what would become known as the Alliance of Sahel States Technology Initiative, a formal partnership between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, focused on shared technological development and mutual defense cooperation. The alliance was more than just military cooperation. It represented a fundamental reimagining of how African nations could collaborate to achieve technological sovereignty. Rather than competing for access to external technology, the three nations would pool resources and expertise to develop indigenous capabilities that served their common interests. 6 months after Operation Golden Eagle, the international situation had evolved from curiosity to active competition for influence over Burkina Faso's technology program. Intelligence reports indicated that several foreign agencies were attempting to recruit Burkinabe technical personnel, while others were developing countermeasures to the drone capabilities that had proven so effective.
In response, Traoré authorized the development of what Dr. Konaté's team called the Digital Shield, a comprehensive defense system designed to protect Burkina Faso's technological infrastructure against both physical and cyber attacks.
The project represented the next evolution of their indigenous technology program, moving beyond offensive capabilities to comprehensive defensive systems. The digital shield integrated multiple layers of protection, advanced radar systems that could detect even small unmanned aircraft, electronic warfare capabilities that could disrupt hostile drone operations, and cybersecurity systems that protected against attempts to compromise Burkina Faso's own technological infrastructure. We must assume that our success will prompt others to develop similar capabilities, potentially directed against us, Traoré explained to his Security Council. The digital shield ensures that we maintain our technological advantage even as others attempt to replicate our innovations. The defensive system's most innovative component was a network of community-based monitoring stations that transformed ordinary citizens into participants in national security. Villagers trained in basic technical skills could operate simple monitoring equipment that fed data to centralized analysis centers, creating a security network that was nearly impossible for external forces to circumvent or neutralize. Fatima Sawadogo, now 21 and serving as director of the Community Technology Program, had become a symbol of how Traoré's vision was transforming rural Burkina Faso. Her village monitoring station not only provided security surveillance, but also coordinated agricultural drone operations, medical delivery services, and educational connectivity. The technology isn't just protecting us, she explained during a demonstration for visiting dignitaries from other African nations. It's empowering us to participate in our country's development in ways that were impossible before. This participatory approach to technological development represented perhaps Traoré's most revolutionary innovation. Rather than creating centralized systems that could be targeted or controlled by external forces, he had built distributed networks that drew strength from popular participation and local knowledge. The international reaction to the digital shield was even more intense than the response to Operation Golden Eagle. Western intelligence agencies recognized that Burkina Faso was not simply acquiring advanced military technology, but was developing comprehensive technological sovereignty that would be extremely difficult to counter or control. A classified CIA assessment obtained through intelligence sharing arrangements warned that Burkina Faso's integrated approach to technological development represents a potential model for technological independence that could spread to other developing nations, fundamentally altering global power dynamics. The concern was not merely about military capabilities, but about the broader implications of technological self-determination. If small, resource-constrained nations could develop advanced technologies independently, it would challenge the technological dependencies that underpinned existing international relationships. 1 year after Operation Golden Eagle, Ibrahim Traoré stood before the largest gathering of African leaders in decades at the Continental Technology Sovereignty Summit in Ouagadougou. Representatives from 48 African nations had come to witness demonstrations of Burkina Faso's technological achievements and to discuss the possibility of continental cooperation in technological development. The summit's opening ceremony featured a coordinated display by agricultural, medical, and security drones that had been adapted for African conditions and manufactured largely with African resources. The demonstration was both technically impressive and symbolically powerful, showing how advanced technology could serve comprehensive development objectives. Distinguished colleagues, Traoré began his keynote address. 18 months ago, Burkina Faso was seen as a victim of circumstances beyond our control. Today, we host this gathering as proof that African innovation can equal achievements anywhere in the world. He outlined a vision for continental technological cooperation that went beyond military applications to encompass healthcare, education, agriculture, and infrastructure development. The key principle was technological sovereignty, developing capabilities that served African needs and remained under African control. We propose the African Technology Cooperation Initiative, a framework for sharing technological innovations across our continent while respecting each nation's sovereignty and specific development priorities. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with leaders from across the continent expressing interest in partnerships that would allow them to develop indigenous technological capabilities, rather than remaining dependent on external providers. President Hakainde Hichilema of Zambia spoke for many when he observed, "What Burkina Faso has achieved demonstrates that we have the human resources and creative capacity to solve our own problems. We no longer need to accept the limitations that others have imposed on our technological development." The summit concluded with the signing of the Ouagadougou Declaration on African Technological Sovereignty, committing signatory nations to prioritize indigenous technological development and to share innovations that could benefit the entire continent. Dr. Konate, now recognized internationally as a leading expert in AI systems for developing world conditions, announced the establishment of the Pan-African Technology Institute, which would coordinate research and development across participating nations while ensuring that resulting innovations remained under African control. "This institute represents something unprecedented," she explained to international media covering the summit. "For the first time, African nations are pooling their technological expertise to create solutions designed by Africans, for Africans, and controlled by Africans." The success of the Continental Technological Sovereignty Summit sent shockwaves through international policymaking communities. The prospect of coordinated African technological development challenged fundamental assumptions about global power structures and economic relationships. In Washington, senior policymakers convened urgent assessments of what analysts were calling the Traoré effect, the demonstration that developing nations could achieve technological sophistication previously thought to be the exclusive domain of major powers. "If this model spreads beyond Africa," warned a National Security Council briefing paper, "it could fundamentally alter global technology relationships and reduce American influence in key regions." Similar concerns were being expressed in European and Asian capitals, where the prospect of technologically independent developing nations represented both competitive challenges and potential opportunities for new forms of cooperation. However, the most significant reactions came from other developing nations outside Africa. Countries from Latin America to Southeast Asia began studying Burkina Faso's model, seeking to understand how they might achieve similar technological sovereignty in their own contexts. The Brazilian government invited Traoré to address a regional technology summit in Sao Paulo, while Indian technology leaders expressed interest in cooperation that could apply Burkina Faso's innovations to South Asian conditions. These expressions of interest suggested that the Ouagadougou Declaration might catalyze technological independence movements far beyond Africa. But the new reality also brought increased risks. Intelligence reports indicated that some foreign powers were considering more aggressive responses to prevent the spread of technological sovereignty models that threatened their strategic interests. "We must be prepared for escalation," Colonel Sao warned during a security briefing. "Our success has made us a target for those who benefit from technological dependency." Traoré's response reflected his understanding that technological sovereignty required continuous innovation and vigilant defense. "Then we must ensure that our capabilities advance faster than any potential threats. The best defense of our independence is continued demonstration of our technological excellence." 3 years after Operation Golden Eagle, Ibrahim Traoré's vision had transformed not only Burkina Faso, but had catalyzed a global movement toward technological sovereignty among developing nations. The small, landlocked West African country had become a symbol of what was possible when nations prioritized indigenous innovation over external dependency. standing in the expanded Center for Technological Innovation, now one of Africa's premier research facilities, Traoré observed young engineers from across the continent, working alongside Burkina Faso colleagues on projects that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. Dr. Konate approached with the latest production statistics. Burkina Faso was now manufacturing and exporting drone systems to 12 African countries, while the agricultural applications had increased national food production by 60% and virtually eliminated famine conditions that had previously affected northern regions. The technology that began as a security necessity has become the foundation for comprehensive national development. More importantly, it has proven that Africans can innovate at the highest levels when given the opportunity and resources. The transformation extended beyond technology to encompass education, healthcare, and economic development. Rural villages now had access to advanced medical services through drone delivery systems, while agricultural productivity had increased dramatically through precision farming techniques adapted for Sahelian conditions. But perhaps the most significant change was psychological. Young Africans no longer assumed that advanced technology had to be imported from elsewhere. They increasingly saw themselves as capable of creating solutions to their own challenges and contributing to global technological advancement. Fatima Sawadago, now 24, and pursuing a graduate degree in technology management while continuing to direct community programs, represented this new generation of African technologists. President Traoré showed us that we don't have to wait for others to solve our problems. We can create our own solutions and share them with the world. As evening approached over Ouagadougou, surveillance drones maintained their quiet patrol of the city's perimeter, no longer just military assets, but symbols of a nation that had refused to accept the limitations imposed by others, and had instead created its own path to technological sovereignty and comprehensive development. The drone attack that had shocked the world 3 years ago had evolved into something far more profound, a demonstration that the future of technology would not be dictated solely by traditional powers, but shaped by the diverse needs and innovations of nations that had been written off as permanent dependents. Ibrahim Traoré, still just 40 years old, had not only secured his country's immediate security, but had initiated a transformation that promised to reshape global technological relationships for decades to come. His vision of African technological sovereignty had become reality, proving that innovation, determination, and strategic patience could overcome even the most daunting challenges. The revolution he had started in a small West African nation now carried implications for the entire global order, demonstrating that in an increasingly connected world, technological excellence could emerge from unexpected places and challenge long-held assumptions about capability, creativity, and control. As night fell over the Sahel, the future looked brighter than it had in generations, illuminated by the promise of African innovation and the determination of leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, who dared to imagine a different path forward for their nations and their continent. 5 years after Operation Golden Eagle first demonstrated Burkina Faso's technological capabilities to the world, the impact of Ibrahim Traoré's vision extended far beyond the borders of his small West African nation. The annual Global Technology Sovereignty Conference, now hosted rotating among participating nations, had become one of the world's premier forums for discussing indigenous technological development and South-South cooperation. The original Ouagadougou Declaration had been adopted in various forms by 34 nations across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, creating a network of countries committed to developing technological solutions appropriate to their specific conditions, rather than simply importing standardized systems from traditional powers. Dr. Aminata Konate, now 37 and serving as Director General of the International Institute for Contextual Technology Development, reflected on the transformation during the latest conference. What began as a security imperative in Burkina Faso has become a global movement toward technological self-determination, she observed. We have proven that innovation is not limited by geography, resources, or historical disadvantages. The statistics spoke for themselves. African technology exports had increased by 400% since the Ouagadougou Declaration, while agricultural productivity across participating nations had improved dramatically through locally adapted precision farming techniques. Medical drone delivery systems had reduced child mortality rates in remote areas by 35%, while educational connectivity programs had brought advanced learning opportunities to previously isolated communities. But perhaps the most significant change was in mindset. A new generation of leaders across the global South no longer accepted technological dependency as inevitable, instead prioritizing indigenous innovation and South-South cooperation over traditional North-South relationships. Ibrahim Traoré, now 42, and having recently won re-election with 78% of the vote in Burkina Faso's first internationally monitored democratic election since his rise to power, continued to embody this transformation. His success in transitioning from military leadership to democratic governance while maintaining his commitment to technological sovereignty had made him a model for leaders across the developing world. Standing before the latest technology conference, Traoré reflected on the journey that had begun with a desperate need to address terrorism and had evolved into a comprehensive reimagining of global technological relationships. The drone attack that first brought international attention to Burkina Faso was not the end goal. It was merely the demonstration that all nations, regardless of size or resources, have the right and the capacity to shape their technological futures according to their own needs and values. As delegates from across the global South applauded, the vision that had begun in a small African nation continued to spread, carrying with it the promise of a more equitable and innovative global order where technological excellence could emerge from any corner of the world, and where innovation served human development rather than reinforcing existing inequalities. The revolution that Ibrahim Traoré had initiated with a few modified drones had become something far greater, a testament to human ingenuity and the power of nations to transcend the limitations that others had imposed upon them, creating instead their own paths to technological sovereignty and comprehensive development. In the distance, barely visible against the evening sky, a new generation of Burkinabe-designed drones conducted their routine patrols, no longer just protecting national security, but serving as symbols of what became possible when visionary leadership combined with indigenous innovation to create solutions that the world had not thought possible from such an unexpected source.